In Vino et Libris Veritas.
Hello. For someone who hates the sound of her own voice, I sure do talk a lot. Some would say too much, some would say excessively, and others would say it's borderline pathological how much I talk. Tomato, tomato. Unfortunately, I have not been able to successfully infiltrate anyone's book clubs in real life, and I don't really have the patience to start my own. I have a lot of things to say about the stuff that I read.
Do you even go to this school?
No, I just have a lot of feelings.
Okay, go home.
A lot of things to say, and no one to say them to. So here I am, making a podcast. How very millennial of me. It's a snowy Saturday night right now, which is a great excuse to curl up with some wine, a book, and avoid all social responsibilities. Instead, I'm doing this, but I do still have wine. Right now, I'm sipping on a very oaky Chardonnay. It's called the Wanted Chard. It's from Italy, and it's delicious. Well, maybe it's delicious. We will get into that later. Today, I'm going to be word vomiting about the cult of Sally Rooney. I will admit I'm a pretty recent convert, and I was obnoxiously stubborn about reading her at first. And I'm not really sure why. That's a bit of a lie. I'm very sure why. It's because she was ragingly popular, and so many people recommended either conversations with friends or normal people to me, and that triggered my individuality complex. And I just refused to read even like a brief synopsis of what her books were about. But finally, this September, I was in my local bookstore and I saw Beautiful World, Where Are You? Was their main display. So I debated buying it, but at the time it was only out in hardcover, and I just wasn't sure if I was ready for that kind of commitment yet. So I picked up Conversations with Friends, trade paperback, Miss Rooney's debut novel, which came out in 2017, and I finally took a chance on her. The lady at the cash register commented on how popular all of her books were, and she was like, I tried reading her book, Normal People, but I absolutely hated it. I just couldn't relate to the characters at all. The writing just didn't work with me, but maybe that's because I'm like 30 years older than the characters. You might like it though. So on that positive note, I went home, cracked it open, and was pretty much immediately enthralled. I think what hooked me about Rooney's writing is just how relatable it is. Not always her characters. To be honest, I don't have much in common with pretty much any of them in terms of culture. They're all Irish, education, jobs, what have you. But Conversations with Friends was written and published when Rooney was around my age, 26 for the record. And there's just this familiar creeping feeling that you don't know as much about the world as you thought you did. That the inner trappings of your own world, your job, your friendships, your messy relationships, your own worldview doesn't provide an accurate picture of the world at large. There's this immaturity to Frances and Bobby in Conversations with Friends that is intimately recognizable. They're intelligent, far more so than I am, but they're also blinded by their youth and their privilege and their very narrow life experiences. We also get to watch Marianne and Connell grow up together and them starting to question how they perceive the world as they leave their small town in favor of Dublin. And as someone who grew up in a small town, I just think it's a very realistic depiction of growth in your early 20s. So many authors, when they're writing their main characters, if they give them a flaw, they also have to balance it out somehow. Like, they feel the need to make up for the bad traits with good traits so that their reader will still like the character. One of the things that I find so impressive about Sally Rooney's writing is that I really get the impression that she doesn't care if we like her characters. That's not why she's writing them. They're imperfect, they're at times insufferable, but she doesn't try to erase that and mold them into a perfect, flawless character who is worthy of love only because they've changed into a better person by the end of the story. Frances and Nick, in Conversations with Friends, are a great example of this. Without giving too much away, their affair, which either blossomed into love or maybe an insecure attachment, honestly, can't tell the difference, was messy, even for an affair, because they are two deeply flawed, hurt people who inevitably hurt others. But I found their relationship oddly relatable, even though I have never had an affair with a married man and don't intend to. Their motivations, their fears, their insecurities were all painfully real. And I think that is largely because Rooney doesn't constantly try to do reputation management for her own characters when she tells her story. And I really love and respect that. And I think that's why so many women my age love Rooney's writing. She's really developed a cult following of fans who would truly read anything she puts out. And without access to any sort of statistics, I'll say just anecdotally that I've noticed her fans are mostly women my age, which is also around her age. She's 30, I'm 26. Sally Rooney, by the time she was in her mid-20s, had already written 2 books, both of which I would consider great books and were met with huge critical acclaim. She has a master's in American literature from Trinity College in Dublin, and the more that I read about her background, the more I see just how much of herself and her experiences she injects into her characters. So I'm going to play just a little clip of an interview Rooney gave this summer in her lovely Irish accent, which I absolutely cannot get enough of.
I didn't have any other life that I could write about. I haven't ever as a writer really been able to write about worlds that I don't know very well. And so I've lived quite a small life. I have never lived outside Ireland. I grew up in Castlebar in County Mayo. I moved to Dublin when I was 18 and I've lived there ever since. And those are really the only places that I've been able to write about. I think to be able to set a story in a place, not so much in a geographical location, but in a community, I need to have a really strong sense of how the people in that community behave. How do they speak? What are the kind of manners and social rules that dictate social interactions in this setting? And I'm limited in my ability to observe that. I feel like I need to know something really well before I can pick up the kind of observations that interest me as a writer.
Some authors can write about experiences that they've never had with people that they've never met. But when you're writing about real communities, if you aren't actually a part of that community, you run the risk of coming off flat and fake, like the infamous men writing women. If you've never actually spent time with and listened to the people that you're writing about, it can come across as out of touch at best or cringy as fuck at worst. Rooney writes about things and people that she knows intimately well, and the realism and relatability of her books really reflect that. Not only do we get to see her characters grow, but you can also see Rooney's own worldview expand from her first book to her third book. Something that I notice in many of Rooney's characters, Frances and Bobby and Melissa in Conversations with Friends, Marianne at times in Normal People, and definitely Alice in Beautiful World, Where Are You?, is that they have a tendency to be a bit pretentious. Bobby is possibly the most guilty of this. Sometimes when she speaks, it's not so much that she's trying to convey a message, but more so that she's trying to remind whoever she's speaking to that she is smarter than them, better than them, and more cultured than them. She definitely has an individuality complex, but she also refuses to spend time around people who don't meet her intellectual standards. I have a hard time deciding whether her interests are genuine or whether they are like a perfectly crafted persona that she's built for herself. I wish I could say I can't relate to Bobby because I find her very grating, but sometimes I find myself questioning whether I truly enjoy something or whether I am convincing myself to like it because I feel like I should, because it fits with the image of myself that I hold in my head, or not liking things because they don't fit with that image. I spent years convincing myself that I did not like Taylor Swift, and you know what? She was my number one most played artist this year, narrowly beating out Phoebe Bridgers, whose music I describe to people as Taylor Swift for people on antidepressants. The wine that I'm drinking tonight, for instance, the Wanted Chard from Italy, was actually recommended to me by one of my favorite workers at my local liquor store. I really respect his opinions, and I always have a fun time chatting with him about wine. But my first sip was not great. I typically do like oaked wines, and this one is pretty stereotypical of an oaked Chardonnay. It's very well-rounded. It has subtle notes of like toast, nuts, and of course oak. But throughout my first few sips, I was just not digging it. I really don't know why. With each sip, I found myself kind of talking myself into liking it. I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm allowed to not like a wine, even though someone whose opinion I respect loved it. Everyone's tastes are different. But even still, I'm sitting here like, well, maybe I don't actually dislike it. It's really growing on me. And this propensity for douchiness was also what held me back from reading Sally Rooney for so long. I figured that someone who is so widely beloved couldn't possibly meet my standards. But of course, I was wrong because that is a ridiculous way to think. I'm really glad that I gave Miss Rooney a chance, and I'm looking forward to her next work. I hope that she doesn't stray from what she has consistently done so well, writing flawed, imperfect, pretentious, real characters whose struggles are both unfamiliar and relatable at the same time. And I wish that was all that I had to say about Sally Rooney and her books and the trials and tribulations of being a selfish 20-something. But it's not. I have too much to say all the time. But I will be shutting up now. If you want to check me out on Instagram, you can find my handle in my bio. I would say I'm on TikTok, but I'm really not. I've posted like once, probably never going to post again, so don't bother. Thanks for listening. By the way, if anyone has made it this far, I would just like to ask you why. I mean, I appreciate it, for sure. Very nice of you. But why? Thank you. Also, my mom's name is Sally, and I think that's part of why I like Sally Rooney so much. Okay, bye.